I saw what I saw, and I can't take that out of my mind.
December 1980. The airspace of a U.S. military base is invaded by UFOs over several nights.
I was thinking at the time, is this a warning? Is this an attempt to communicate?
Among the dozens of witnesses, high-ranking Air Force officers.
These are military people trained to observe.
Once sworn to secrecy, they're now ready to talk.
I walked around it. I felt it.
Almost immediately, critical evidence disappears. A cover-up begins amid claims of brainwashing and intimidation.
They said bullets are cheap.
But the cover-up can't stop civilians from coming forward to corroborate the sightings.
It was gone. It was just incredible, wasn't it?
A top-secret memo confirming the events unleashes a firestorm.
This was an official United States Air Force document talking about a structured metallic craft.
And amazingly, part of the encounter is captured on audio tape.
There's no doubt about it. This is weird.
Now, for the first time ever, the Sci-Fi Channel brings together eyewitnesses and scientists to investigate the case. New witnesses go on the record for the first time.
It was like a pulsating eye.
The truth about what happened in Rendlesham Forest.
The Rendlesham Forest incident is bigger than Roswell.
Could well change what you believe about UFOs.
This here is an official U.S. Air Force investigation, and we got put in a world of
I'm Bryant Gumbel. Join me as the Sci-Fi Channel investigates the world's best documented UFO encounter, the invasion at Rendlesham.
It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
This may be the most shocking story you've never heard. In December of 1980, UFOs allegedly invaded the airspace of 2 U.S. air bases in England. Even more shocking, airmen stationed there observed the events, but were powerless to do anything about them. The British and U.S. governments claimed nothing of defense significance had occurred. But now a Sci-Fi Channel investigation has assembled credible witnesses, physical evidence, and newly declassified documents which tell a very different story. The Rendlesham Forest case is one with explosive implications. Uncovering the truth of what really happened there could finally reveal why UFOs are one of the most closely guarded secrets of the modern age.
I have gone on record as saying that Rendlesham might be some sort of turning point in history. I think, but it may be that if any one case leads to an explanation for the UFO phenomenon, this case might be it.
The government have the idea that if they disclose the fact that there are physical objects with maximum performance which we can't match, people would get in a panic.
I think our government owes the men who were involved in this. They owe them not just an explanation, but some compensation for what they suffered.
This was a cover-up, you know? Why was this a cover-up? So for the first time, we're starting to get somewhere.
This could lead to chaos, in my opinion. I think there are very good reasons for the cover-up.
December 2002. Britain's Ministry of Defense releases 180 pages of documents related to the Rendlesham Forest UFO incidents. Included in those pages are claims of extraterrestrial encounters, men in black, brainwashing, and accusations of a government cover-up of epic proportions.
We never talked about it. Once we were debriefed, we never talked about it with anyone.
I was told specifically not to say anything about it. You're not to tell anybody on the base. She said you don't tell your wife about it. You don't talk about it around your daughter. You don't talk around about anybody. And that's what I did.
I learned after the fact, secondhand, that there were some pretty intense interrogations, is the best way to put it, of several of the young airmen, at least 3 or 4 of them. And I personally think that 2 of them were affected, and still are to this day, by some of the techniques that were used to extract information or discuss things with them.
And there were a lot of people on this base that violated people's human rights, including mine,
where there was mind control attempts for whatever agenda put on people, and this is all in 24 hours to 48 hours after the incident.
But why would any government agency employ such extreme measures to cover up evidence of UFOs?
The problem is thousands of people have top secret clearance. When a subject is very sensitive, it needs to be further restricted, further compartmentalized, and that's when you get what calls to above top secret, and the UFO subject falls within that category, and it has since 1947 at least.
In many ways, the Rendlesham Forest UFO encounters of 1980 are eerily similar to events that shook the small town of Roswell, New Mexico, back in July of 1947. It was there, in the middle of the arid New Mexico desert, that an alien spacecraft reportedly crashed, only to have its wreckage and, some say, crew recovered by the U.S. Army. In the cases of both Roswell and Rendlesham, crucial evidence disappeared. Decorated military officers were forced to change their stories, and countless lives were changed forever.
Whatever happened at Roswell, it's now over 50 years old, and the number of primary witnesses who are still alive and able to give testimony is very small. Whereas the Rendlesham Forest incident, we have many witnesses who were directly involved in these events who are happy to go on the record. In strictly evidential terms, this case is bigger than Roswell.
Journalist Georgina Bruni spent years interviewing countless Rendlesham eyewitnesses for her book, You Can't Tell the People.
This is a case with so much evidence. It's just amazing. You've got military witnesses here, commanders, colonels. You've got, of course, Colonel Holt's memorandum. You've got his tape recording that he made on the night.
Keep the flashlights off. There's something very, very strange.
And also now we've got the photographs of the landing site. And of course on top of that you've got the witness statements from just after the incident. I mean, there is an abundance of evidence here to say that something happened.
The Kecksburg, Pennsylvania investigation utilized science and key eyewitness testimony to reveal a smoking gun, possible proof that something either landed or crashed in rural Pennsylvania in 1965.
Something happened in 1965 or thereabout. Something that was very abrupt that reduced the growth of the tree, and it's reflected in the narrower rings that occurred after that time.
As compelling as the Kecksburg case may be, Sci-Fi's companion investigation across the Atlantic in Rendlesham Forest turned up what many believe to be the best proof yet that an extraterrestrial spacecraft or spacecrafts did land outside 2 U.S. air bases in December of 1980, and that the British and U.S. governments have engaged in a massive cover-up of the entire incident. Now, for the first time, Sci-Fi moves beyond the gossip and half-truths that have surrounded the case for 23 years. Sci-Fi will track down new witnesses, reconstruct and revisit the actual sites with senior Air Force officers, and for the first time ever, show controversial footage that could be the key to unlocking the Rendlesham Forest mystery. The story begins in rural Suffolk, an area known for its dark and mysterious history.
It's one thing to focus on the UFO incident, but I always say to people, look at the background to the area. Possibly this has something to do with that case.
Suffolk, East Anglia is about 70 miles or so northeast of London. It is an area with a darker and more subdued military test history. Mustard gas and the like were worked out in that area during World War I.
The whole east coast of England in that area for decades was used for military weapons research, radar research, all sorts of strange tales from the Second World War about villages being evacuated because of secret experiments involving death rays and burned bodies found on the beaches and things like this.
Not far from this area, separated by a tiny slice of Rendlesham Forest, lie two key military installations. So close together, they're called the twin bases. Bentwaters and Woodbridge served as British installations until 1951, when they were leased to the United States. In 1980, the twin bases ranked among the most important U.S. military outposts in the world. More than 1,000 planes and some 4,000 Air Force personnel stood ready to defend or attack as necessary. Reliable reports have recently revealed that the bases even housed tactical nuclear weapons that could be used to thwart potential Soviet aggression. While writing his book on the Rendlesham events, Left at East Gate, author Peter Robbins spent years researching the history of Bentwaters and Woodbridge.
The secret of the bases was that Bentwaters and Woodbridge were the home of a huge amount of nuclear ordnance in violation of our then existing treaty with the United Kingdom.
Colonel Charles Halt and Sergeant Jim Peniston are two of the key witnesses in the Rendlesham case. Even today, the topic of nuclear weapons remains a sensitive subject. I know you're not at liberty to either confirm or deny the existence of tactical nuclear weapons at the base where you served. Nonetheless, it's widely believed there were as many as 500 tactical nuclear weapons at that base. When you reported what you saw, did you also report that the craft seemed to take a particular interest in any particular area?
I'm not sure I want to comment on that.
I don't know if I can
it's very
comment.
difficult to comment on.
Now, officially, we didn't have nuclear weapons, but that's what we were trained to do, was secure the ordnance.
The men assigned the duty of keeping Bentwaters, Woodbridge, and its weaponry secure were Air Force Security Police. These highly trained men made up the core group of witnesses for the Rendlesham incidents.
I think that most of the witnesses that I've interviewed have been very honest because, you know, I've interviewed them over and over again. I mean, they have accused me of interrogating them. I think that Jim Peniston is an amazing witness.
Sergeant Jim Peniston's primary job at Bentwaters was to protect the base from terrorists and saboteurs, be it a Soviet invasion or a lost nuclear weapon. Peniston and his fellow airmen were trained to handle any situation that arose.
The job of the security policeman on these bases was to make sure that the integrity of the base was secure. You got to be able to tell by just the silhouette any type of aircraft, NATO, Warsaw Pack, and we were trained on that routinely, sometimes monthly. There was no aircraft that I could not identify at that point in time.
In the early morning hours of December 27, 1980, Jim Peniston received word of a possible aircraft crash in Rendlesham Forest.
I got a radio call from Central Security Control that says to 1012 their office, which is to phone in the office immediately. And I asked Sergeant Coffey, I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, you need to get out the East Gate right away. I said, well, what's the problem? He said, I'd rather not talk to you about that on the phone. So I put everything down and off I went.
The veteran airman headed out into the dark woods, unaware that he was about to confront a situation that defied any earthly explanation. When UFO Invasion at Rendlesham returns, hard physical evidence of the Rendlesham UFO. Two Air Force officers risked their reputations and pensions to solve a UFO case many believe is bigger than Roswell. And later, never-before-seen video that could blow the lid off the Rendlesham incident.
At Rick Ford.
UFO Invasion at Rendlesham will return. December 1980. Over a three-night period, numerous U.S. airmen encounter unexplained lights in a metallic craft outside two American air bases located in Suffolk, England. Almost immediately, U.S. military officials erect a stony wall of silence around the incidents, igniting claims of a cover-up.
It was clamped down, and it was compartmentalized, and that's how the Air Force works and the military works. What one guy knows, they don't talk about it to other guys. If you're not maintaining your oath and secrecy, you've broken rank.
The consequences of being a public UFO witness, especially in a military context, has more than a military cost, a social cost. It has a very human cost.
Whether it's Roswell, Kecksburg, or Rendlesham, convincing military witnesses to go on the record has been extremely difficult. The reasons range from national security oaths to fears of ridicule, imprisonment, or worse. But one top man has spoken out. Lord Peter Hill Norton, Britain's former Admiral of the Fleet. He believes Charles Halt, Jim Penniston, and others encountered an otherworldly craft.
These are military people. They are, by their very definition, experts at spotting military facts. I don't see any reason why any of them should have made up one word of their testimony about what happened.
The outspoken Hill Norton is the highest-ranking military figure in the world to go on the record about the Rendlesham case.
In America, the equivalent would be maybe a former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, someone like Colin Powell, actually coming out and stating in public that he believes in UFOs and he believes they may be extraterrestrial. It's that important.
Something actually landed, and I don't think there can be any doubt about that. I would be very surprised indeed if there were not official documents somewhere hidden which will explain that something did land, but would be very surprised indeed if anybody knew what it was.
The only official U.S. document that's been released is the Halt Memo. Written in January of 1981, 2 weeks after the incidents occurred, by then Bentwaters Woodbridge Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt. The memo details multiple UFO encounters.
I put together sort of a, how shall I say, cleaned up version of what happened. I called it Unexplained Lights.
Even in its sanitized form, the Halt Memo graphically described extremely unusual phenomena.
Early in the morning, December 27th, saw unusual lights outside the back gate at RAF Woodbridge. The individuals reported seeing a strange glowing object described as being metallic in appearance and triangular, approximately 2 to 3 meters across the base. And as the patrolman approached the object, it maneuvered through the trees and disappeared. Signed, Charles I. Halt, Lieutenant Colonel, USAF Deputy Base Commander.
I waited several weeks after I made the memo, and nothing seemed to happen, so I put the file away.
While the memo is considered by many to be definitive proof of the bizarre events that befell Halt and numerous other airmen in Rendlesham Forest, it is only the tip of the iceberg. There are many questions still to be answered. What were those unexplained lights? Why did they invade the airspace of 2 bases that house nuclear weapons? And why is the U.S. government trying to cover up what really happened? As part of its latest investigation, the Sci-Fi Channel flew Sergeant Jim Penniston and Colonel Charles Halt 5,000 miles back to Rendlesham Forest.
Oh, Jim.
For Halt and Penniston, Rendlesham Forest is a crime scene of sorts. Aided by environmental scientist Patrick Davison of Mayer Environmental, they will reconstruct the events of late December 1980. The hope is that the 2 airmen can lead Davison to the exact landing site, where he'll test for residual radiation.
We initially thought that this was an aircraft crash, at least I did. Unfortunately, everything changed about 10 minutes into the investigation, and that's why you're here.
We've got a Geiger counter for measuring gamma radiation and also a gamma spectrometer.
If radiation is still present, it could provide evidence that a craft or crafts landed in Rendlesham Forest.
We certainly could have used that the night we were out in the forest.
We've got a little bit of a jaunt here. Not too bad.
Jim Penniston's search for answers to this mystery won't be easy. Much has changed in Rendlesham Forest since December of 1980.
The air temperature was 32 degrees. It was clear, crisp night. We drove down this.
Penniston was accompanied by Sergeant John Burroughs and Airman First Class Edward Cabansag, who'd been transferred to Bentwaters only a few days prior.
As we were heading out, I thought this was a prank. I thought, okay, 3-4 days on with my flight, there's a big, huge mud puddle out here, and they're going to throw me in the mud. As we got closer and closer, and I could see the intensity on both the other gentlemen's face, I knew that this was really going to be something more involved than a prank.
Road was pretty hard, working because everything was frozen. The other problem we were having, and it's inherent of the area, is we were having a dampening effect on the radios, meaning the radio was breaking up.
It's like the closer we would get to it, we would lose communication with Central Security Control.
To this day, Peniston remains certain he handled the situation exactly by the book. And I'm not a military guy, so forgive me. But if I go out in the woods and I see something that is that strange, I don't stand there for 45 minutes and take pictures and notes. I go for reinforcements in a hurry.
Okay, good question. What we did is we each had interbase radios, so I had people set up as relays for the radio. We were in constant contact to a point. So during those 45 minutes, even though I wasn't receiving, didn't really mean a lot to me. But I still went and transmitted. I have to report what's going on. We outside our installation and with the resources around that base, I better be reporting every 5 minutes or they're going to send somebody else out there. And I did not want anybody out there until I could ascertain what was in front of me.
His flight chief was actually at the back gate relaying and monitoring this whole thing, and it would have been incumbent upon him to make the decision to up-channel, to call for help, call for 30 and 30, which means a lot of armed troops immediately.
So in other words, yours was standard operating procedure?
He operated within the parameters he should have.
There was some distortion on the perception of time. The time out there seemed to go awful fast. 30, 45 minutes felt like 2 or 3 minutes. At this point in time, I realized it wasn't an aircraft crash. Wasn't getting the smell of fuel burning. Job was identify, get the facts, report the facts, and let somebody else make the assessment. I had my notebook out, and I was taking notes.
Jim Peniston has brought a key piece of evidence back with him to Rendlesham Forest. His original notebook from the night that he encountered an unidentifiable craft.
Description of what was going on was larger white light glowing.
Burroughs would say, do you see that? Do you see what's out there at the edge of the trees? And I'm looking and I'm looking and I'm going, what are you seeing? What are you seeing? And then he extended his finger out, put my head to his end of his finger. Look at the end of my finger. It was moving left, right, and it had blue, white, yellow lights.
Approximately 10-15 meters from it, it was quite distinguishable. It was triangular in shape. It was not an aircraft, but it was a craft of some sort.
Everything that I had seen in my technical school, that I was privileged under secret clearance to see, didn't look anything like that.
Certain things didn't make sense. I couldn't determine the front. That was a problem. Second, it seemed running, but no sound. Third was the aspect of having electricity in the air. I could feel it in my clothing, my hair, my skin. The next one is after I got up close to the craft, the writing changes. It changes from being written confidently to shaky. Gotta stop there. Sorry. I need a little time. Okay. Wow.
When UFO Invasion at Rendlesham returns, Air Force officers meet new witnesses who can confirm their encounters.
It did seem as though it was observing us.
A cover-up begins as a young airman is forced to lie about what he saw.
I was told to sign paperwork stating that there was nothing out of the ordinary.
And a first-hand look at what could be physical proof of the Rendlesham UFO. UFO Invasion at Rendlesham will continue in a moment. The Betwaters incident of 1980 is certainly the best-known UFO sighting in British history. But 24 years earlier, in nearly the exact same location, Royal Air Force fighter pilots encountered an object that defies explanation to this very day. The case, known simply as Lakenheath, is legendary among UFO researchers.
An object was tracked on radar jets were scrambled, as has happened on a number of occasions over the years, and the pilots then had a visual sighting of an unknown craft of some sort.
Radar personnel at the Bentwaters Woodbridge Control Tower estimated that the bright light flew by at an astonishing 4,000 miles per hour.
An UFO came in and played these cat and mouse games with British interceptors. And in fact, that case was secret for about 10 years and then was discussed in the Condon Committee report, where it was listed as an unknown.
Like Lakenheath, the Rendlesham Forest sightings of 1980 were also dismissed by the Ministry of Defense. But if, as the MOD claims, the events were of no defense significance, then why were they so interested in radar records from the Bentwaters Control Tower during Christmas week of 1980?
What happened was that one of these radar operators got a call from somebody at Bentwaters to say, do you have anything unusual on your scope? And this officer checked, and for 2 or 3 sweeps of the screen, so just for a few seconds, there was something there, and he said, yes, I do have an uncorrelated target, and it is directly over your base.
What I was told from Sergeant Coffey, the controller, is that he had to check with radar. He's the one that informed me that that night, before I proceeded off base, he says, well, yes, we had contact, and it just dropped out of sight within like 5 or 6 miles of Bentwaters. Some of the difficulty I'm having is I've only been to the site twice. The night it happened, the following morning.
In order for Sergeant Jim Peniston and Colonel Charles Halt to find the site, they must comb 5 square miles of Rendlesham Forest, looking for a site that measures 10 feet by 10 feet. If Peniston and Halt can locate the craft's actual touchdown point, environmental scientist Patrick Davison will test for residual radiation, radiation that could offer conclusive proof of the incident.
By the size of the craft, the only way it could have came down is from above.
Airman Edward Cabansag and Sergeant John Burroughs accompanied Peniston into the forest in the early morning hours of December 27, 1980. Cabansag and Burroughs were stationed behind Peniston to maintain clear radio contact with the base. Cabansag recalls the mysterious craft hovering in front of them.
It was maybe 100 yards, 150 yards. Couldn't quite tell if it was silvery, but it was moving left, right, left, right. Nothing could move the way it moved at the time. Nothing could move that quick.
Following protocol, Peniston approached the craft, snapping photos and taking notes.
It was probably the most different thing I've ever investigated in my entire life. Anything I could see, I would go ahead and write down. Structure of craft, fabric, black, smooth, glass-like, surface unknown, identity unknown. I paced off the size of the craft, taking notes of the distance. Size, 9 feet long, approximately 7 to 8 feet high. I couldn't tell what was the front or the back. I had trouble when I was walking around the craft to distinguish engines. Propulsion, unknown. No sound, but apparently operating somehow. Type of aircraft, unknown.
Peniston observed the craft from every angle.
I made extra effort to look for the crew compartment or windows or anything like that, or access ports. Could not see any. There was no handles or anything like that. The craft was completely smooth on the outside. Skin fabric of craft, warm. Probably the most startling part of it was the fabric of the craft. Aircraft are metal, and this was maybe metal, but it was very smooth. The fabric seemed like black glass. High electric static on clothes, skin, hair. Identifying markings on left front. That is probably the most compelling thing that said, oh my God, this is from someplace else. Symbols etched or engraved, question mark. Symbols recorded.
This was not the first time eyewitnesses reported unidentifiable symbols on a UFO. Major Jesse Marcel brought wreckage from the Roswell crash home to show his family. His son was so amazed by a small beam covered with symbols that he later commissioned an artist to duplicate it.
I recall picking it up like this
and looking at the inside surface and seeing the symbols, the color, the purple-violet hue, I have not seen anything that looked like that before nor since.
In the 1965 Kecksburg, Pennsylvania UFO incident, eyewitnesses also saw unusual symbols etched on the bizarre object that had crashed in the woods.
I was close enough, I'd say, that I could see what it was shaped like, and I could see this hieroglyphic stuff all around the back.
It had like Egyptian writing or a Russian writing on it, and I couldn't figure out what it was.
Three seemingly unrelated events spanning 50 years. And yet, by most accounts, the symbols reported on each of the crafts appear to be eerily similar in design. Could the cases be connected? According to many witnesses and investigators, the answer to that question can be found only in Washington, D.C. But in the early morning hours of December 27, 1980, Sergeant Jim Penniston had no answers for what he was seeing.
Liftoff, 2:45. No sound, no exhaust. Takeoff unknown, speed impossible. The takeoff was probably the most amazing thing I've ever seen. With absolutely no sound. It just lifted up maybe 2 or 3 feet, and it did a little bit of maneuvering back in the trees. Momentarily hovered, then in a blink of an eye, it left. Literally a blink of an eye.
I'm sure you've asked yourself, is it possible I'm wrong? Is there anything else it could have possibly been?
The problem I have with it, we can't replicate the technology today. You don't have engines with no sound. We can't develop anything today, so I don't know what it is.
Suffolk, England. The Sci-Fi Channel's investigation brings Charles Halt and Jim Penniston face to face with civilian eyewitnesses for the first time. Like Jim Penniston, Roy and Marina Webb also encountered a mysterious craft in the early morning hours of December 27, 1980, as they were returning home from a family get-together.
My daughter spotted this shooting star. You know what children are like. Oh, Dad, there's a shooting star. Then she just said, well, that seems very, very odd. It seems to be traveling parallel with us. My husband thought it could have been a jet. But the longer we went, he realized that it obviously wasn't.
The more we carried on, so the light was still there. Then that's why I asked my wife to stop the next lay-by. We pulled in the lay-by.
He wound the window down and showed me where it was. And it was stationary. It did seem as though it was observing us because there was no other traffic on the road. And then it started to travel upwards.
And then that went off at a very fast pace.
Blink of an eye. It was incredible.
The Webbs aren't the only civilian eyewitnesses to corroborate the timeline of events on December 27, 1980.
Well, it's sort of interesting to talk to you, Jerry, after all this.
Woodbridge resident Jerry Harris may have observed the same events as Jim Penniston, but from a different perspective.
I walked across the yard, and I could see the lights over the trees over there. You go up in the sky and come back down again and go crossways, very, very, very fast. And they would sort of come to a standstill and hover, and they would move off again. Eventually, 2 of them sort of went away into the distance. The other one stayed there. It went up in the air and hovered, then came down and went straight down into the trees. And I thought it had crashed. Everything went quiet, nothing there. So I thought, well, it's finished. Went to turn to go away, and it came up after the trees and disappeared, getting smaller, 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 out of sight. And never saw it again.
For Jim Penniston, the 45-minute encounter with a UFO posed serious problems. Dating back to the Roswell crash in 1947, the military had imposed an unofficial code of silence on any personnel who witnessed a UFO.
I started thinking about the reality of the situation. pretty much the attitude. If you reported something like that at that time, it probably would end your career. I said, my God, I can't report this as it happened. But I'm going to have something to report when I get in there. What I did is I did a sanitized version of the happenings. I kept it down to, we seen colored lights, minor activity, didn't use certain words intentionally, such as craft.
The veteran officer voluntarily altered his version of the events, but young airman Edward Cabansag was forced to change his story.
I was told to sign some paperwork stating that what I saw out there was just the beacon that was out there and that there was nothing out of the ordinary. Yes, there was a cover-up.
Coming up, a controversial witness in the Rendlesham case recounts his terrifying interrogation.
They said, you have seen something that we have known of for longer than any of you in this room has been alive.
UFOs return a few nights later, and the incident is captured on tape.
It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way.
The general in charge of the twin bases goes on camera for the first time ever.
How would you write a book or a regulation to deal with something that you don't even know exists?
And later, this video could shed light on what actually landed at Rendlesham. UFO Invasion at Rendlesham will return. December 1980. Just outside a U.S. military base in England, Sergeant Jim Peniston and two other airmen encountered what can best be described as a UFO. Within hours, the air base was abuzz with tales of little green men and flying saucers. Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt was not amused. You went out supposedly to debunk rumors that were swirling about the base. Is that fair?
That's correct. I went out to put it all to rest because our security police were spending more time focusing on the sky and the surrounding area than they were protecting the assets they were supposed to be protecting.
So fair to say you went out as a cynic?
I certainly went out as a cynic.
What'd you come back as?
I came back wishing I hadn't gone out.
On December 28, 1980, shortly after the initial incident, Halt was attending a holiday party.
We just finished the main course when the on-duty flight commander came in just as white as a sheet. He just looked ashen. He came in and approached the base commander and I and said, we've got to talk now, it's back. We looked at each other and said, what's back? He said, the UFO.
Colonel Halt left the base accompanied by several other officers. To better document their investigation, the team carried night vision scopes, Geiger counters, and cameras.
When we went into the forest, we were somewhere between that little, I believe it's a beech tree.
Working with the Sci-Fi Channel, Colonel Charles Halt and Sergeant Jim Peniston have come back to investigate the strange events of December 1980. This is the first time that the two airmen have been to Rendlesham Forest together. For 2 decades, they've assumed that they were talking about the same landing site.
I got a problem here.
You do?
Yeah. From this point, where was the original landing site that you think?
Over in here is where I was taken to and where I was shown the 3 indentations.
We got a problem.
You think you were at another place?
I was at another location.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I can show you where the 3 indentations I saw were.
Let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at it.
On the evening Colonel Halt conducted his investigation, he brought along a tape recorder to chronicle the events. The result is one of the most unsettling pieces of evidence ever to surface in a UFO case.
Looking directly overhead where you can see an opening in the trees plus some freshly broken pine branches underground underneath.
He recorded 18 minutes of what was a 4-hour event. It is the most incredible tape. It's such a wonderful piece of evidence.
In the years since the Rendlesham Forest encounters, key witnesses have moved to different parts of the world or disappeared altogether. But this investigation has turned up some startling new facts.
The puzzle's starting to come together better. For instance, one of the people that had disappeared for a long time, Monroe Nevels. We've been looking for the guy for 15 or 20 years. And they found him. Sci-Fi has found him. And his story corroborates. I mean, it fits right in.
Though rumored to have gone underground years ago, Sci-Fi Channel investigators found Monroe Nevels living in a small southwestern town. In 1980, Nevels was the disaster preparedness officer at the base. This is the first time he's spoken on the record about the Rendlesham Forest incident.
I was always a person that I had an analytical view of things. I would look at it, I'd analyze it, try to figure out what's making this happen.
Neville's, an expert in radiation detection and photography, was among the first airmen to enter the clearing and discovered 3 strange indentations at the alleged landing site.
We found a small, what looks like a blasted or scrubbed up area here.
It was almost as though it was a small object. It sat down with the 3 tripods, come down on the ground, and the unique thing was that the pressure on each one of those tripods had been pressed down into the ground at the same weight.
Neville's and the other airmen also discovered strange burn marks on several trees that faced the landing site.
Never see a pine tree has been damaged react that fast. I'm liable to put that in. There's other trees here that are damaged in similar fashion. Yes, so
I had Sergeant Neville's take the Geiger counter and take readings all around.
I started picking up slight readings, and then as I brought this up toward the tree where it burned out, it started really getting loud.
There's any readings on the tree you're taking samples from on the side facing the suspected landing site? 4 clicks max. That's the strongest point on the tree? Yes, sir. If you come to the back, there's no clicks whatsoever. Interesting.
Halt leads Jim Peniston and environmental scientist Patrick Davison to within 100 feet of the site he investigated 2 decades earlier.
Okay, well, I'll get the kit out and we'll have a look.
Yeah, let's check the area here. This is probably a very good place to check.
Time and weather have long since worn away the landing impressions, but Davison will still test for any residual radiation.
That's a lot more sophisticated than what we had back in 1980. All right, let's see what you get. Look around here. I want you to sweep the area, and you might even touch a tree or two. Swing it around one of the larger trees, just out of curiosity. Do you read in milliroentgens?
No, it doesn't. No, it's just purely counts per second.
Ironically, the men assigned to debunk UFO sightings in late 1980 soon found themselves in the middle of a close encounter.
Wasn't a pigmentation. You just saw a light where? Right at this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flashlight. There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? Don't know, sir.
Lieutenant Colonel Halt and his men were not the first to witness bizarre lights in the skies over England during December of 1980. Just 2 weeks earlier, in London, dozens of people reported UFO sightings. Among them, best-selling author and UFO investigator Timothy Good.
It was about 4 o'clock, and I saw a very bright point of light in the sky. I glanced at it. I thought, that's not Venus, it's not an aircraft, it appears to be static. So I started to run home. I got home, opened all the windows, the damn thing had gone. I thought no more of it, but the next day a journalist from the Kentish Times phoned and said from 3 o'clock until 4:15, at least 40 witnesses saw this unidentified object in the sky.
When Good interviewed eyewitnesses to the event, many described a triangular craft, reddish at the tip, with a silver body.
It would hover for long periods, then it would shoot off to another point in the sky and stay there. Occasionally it would split up into up to 3 or 4 objects. And then they would come together again and it would stay in the same place. This was going on for 1 hour and 15 minutes.
That could not be a weather balloon. That's impossible.
The next day, in a rural English county, farmer Klaus Peterson took this home video of a UFO. The object hovered overhead for more than an hour.
They only had 6-power video, so you cannot see any shape. But at least we have their voices on tape describing what happened as they observed it.
It's a triangular shape.
Yeah.
You know, almost a comet.
Yeah.
Britain's Ministry of Defense ruled that the object was a meteorite.
This was not a meteorite. Meteorites don't hover and describe series of maneuvers for 1 hour and 15 minutes. If they do, you know, that's in itself an extraordinary phenomenon.
Were these triangular craft sightings somehow related to what Jim Peniston encountered in Rendlesham Forest? And what about its ability to maneuver at such high speeds, much like the objects reported by Colonel Halt and described in detail on his audio tape?
Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. Looks to be maybe a quarter to half mile, maybe further out. Let's switch off.
We're seeing the strange light. It's obvious under intelligent control. It's moving through the forest, avoiding the trees. So, yeah, there's a great deal of concern.
There's no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead. There's yellow. I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It's coming this way. It is definitely coming this way. Pieces of it are shooting off. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
I was excited, I'll tell you that. I do know that. And I remember the adrenaline was running so fast that night.
We're approaching the fence line. We see the object. The object continues to move through the trees. It recedes a bit. It goes out across the farmer's field to the left of the farmer's house. And it appears to be shedding like molten metal. It's dripping off it.
He and his men are reacting quite emotionally in a military situation to a thing that looks like a giant eye coming through the sky at them. You can hear the tension in their voices.
One light to the front, okay. One light to the left. Keep the flashlights off. Here's something very, very strange. Pieces are falling off it again. It just moved to the right. Yeah. Off to the right. Oh, let's approach to the edge of the woods up there. Can you undo without lights? Let's do it carefully. Come on.
We were standing somewhere here within about 50 feet either way, looking out. The farmer's house is out there. The object was less than 100 feet to the left of the house.
And as we looked at it through the night vision goggles, it looked like kind of like a large brick. The heat was coming off of it, and as I dropped the goggles, I could see the green turn to yellowish orange, indicating that there was something there like it was burning. And every once in a while, you'd see the flashes of sparks flying off of it.
And we watched it in the field for, I don't know, maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes. And very silently, the best way I can describe it, it exploded and broke into white objects, smaller white objects, and they disappeared.
Another version of that night's events comes from Larry Warren, co-author of Left at Eastgate. All these years later, he's still at a loss to explain what he and his fellow airmen encountered in Rendlesham Forest.
I'm selfish. I want to know what the hell it was we saw. I want to know why the paranoia is so great to keep this quiet.
18-year-old Larry Warren had been a Bentwaters Woodbridge security policeman for only 4 weeks. He claims that in the early morning hours of December 29, 1980, he and several airmen were ordered into the forest and stationed at least 150 yards from Colonel Halt and the others.
They saw what they saw from decidedly different angles, and one in absolutely mind-blowing close-up and the other as more anomalous and at quite a distance.
Much of Warren's account differs sharply from that of Lieutenant Colonel Halt.
The first thing I saw in the field was this mist-like platform object. It was a foot in height, and it was at 50-foot diameter approximately. And this red light came in, did a downward arc over the field. It dispersed. There was a silent explosion that was controlled. There was a structured machine in its place, and it was there, and it was on the ground.
When UFO invasion at Rendlesham continues, did extraterrestrials touch down in Rendlesham Forest?
And they had faces, and they were alive.
Was the Bentwaters base under attack from UFOs?
It moved toward us at very high speed and sent down a direct beam.
And was hard evidence covered up?
Somebody from the base was filming this. No one knows what happened to these films.
December 1980. On 2 different nights, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt and Sergeant Jim Peniston each encountered UFOs outside the Bentwaters Woodbridge air bases in southern England. Now a Sci-Fi Channel investigation has reunited Halt and Peniston and brought them into Rendlesham Forest together for the first time. Retracing their steps, 2 retired Air Force officers make a stunning new discovery.
Apparently, after 23 years, find out today the possibility exists of 2 landing sites
Let's see here. Halt site is almost a half-mile in that direction, which tells me there's a high probability that there was probably two landings, apparently by the same type of craft.
If this kind of UFO investigation had been attempted 50 years ago, the Roswell mystery might well have been solved. But in 1947, the Air Force and possibly other American intelligence organizations effectively silenced eyewitnesses, like Major Edwin Easley, who oversaw the cleanup of the Roswell crash site.
Whenever we would ask him about Roswell, he would simply tell us that he had promised President Truman that he would not talk about it, and he wouldn't talk about it. In 1992, he was dying. He was already on high doses of morphine. My niece kept asking him, well, Pappy, what did you see out there? What'd you see? What'd you see? And finally he said, creatures.
Was Major Easley's deathbed confession brought on by his medication, or was he finally revealing the truth about the Roswell crash? Has the government hidden evidence of extraterrestrial visitation from the American public for over 50 years? If one former U.S. airman is to be believed, the answer is a resounding yes.
As far as sightings of perceived alien creatures within the forest, perhaps the person who speaks more about this than anybody else is Larry Warren. I've known Larry since the mid-1990s and spent a lot of time with him over in England, and Larry comes across to me as a very credible source.
Larry Warren is interesting. I interviewed him, many other people have interviewed. The problem is that he does change his story.
Some of the witnesses have said, you know, there's elements to this, you know, the public shouldn't hear basically because it takes away credibility. It's easier to just say we saw craft. But in reality, these things are piloted and controlled by something, and they made themselves visible to us. There were three things that moved out. There was light around them. They were translucent at points, like bluish light. They had faces, and they were alive. If there was communication between this life form, or whatever it was, Colonel Williams would have been closest.
Colonel Gordon Williams was the wing commander in charge of the Bentwaters Woodbridge bases. Today, the retired brigadier general speaks bluntly about Larry Warren's claim.
I thought it was a flight of fancy when I heard that story that he was telling. I wondered what kind of cigarettes he was smoking.
General Williams had to know about this incident. It must have been very difficult for him. No one in the Air Force ever wants to talk about a UFO incident. It's just not done.
When he was interviewed several years ago directly by another researcher, he went out of his way to say, I will neither confirm nor deny my involvement in this incident, and seemed to be enjoying keeping us dangling with the statement. I think this is standard military procedure.
Standard military procedure at Bentwaters Woodbridge was to report anything that threatened base security. Following the incidents in Rendlesham Forest, several airmen gave written statements. Others were questioned repeatedly by military investigators.
Over the 3 weeks after the incident, I was probably debriefed maybe 6 or 7 times.
Some base personnel conducted their own investigations, but evidence had a strange way of disappearing. When Master Sergeant Ray Goulias took photos of the alleged landing site the day after the sightings, his film came back from the lab completely fogged.
And I was very upset that they did not come out, because that's never happened to me before or since.
Coincidentally, the film shot by both Sergeant Peniston and Sergeant Nevels the nights they were in the forest also came back fogged.
Evidently there was enough radiation or whatever it was there that it destroyed the film.
But was it elevated radiation levels that caused the film to fog over, or something more sinister?
I have very strong suspicions as to what happened to the film. I'd say odds on are that somebody swapped film with Nevels and gave him some fog rolls.
For years, it was widely believed that no photos of the landing site existed. But this single strip of photos was given to Sergeant Ray Goulias in the 1990s by a fellow airman who wishes to remain anonymous. These pictures appear to corroborate eyewitness descriptions of the landing area. Sergeant Peniston returned to this same site the day after his experience in the forest. He made plaster casts of the strange indentations in the ground.
I had to have tangible, solid evidence for myself only, that this happened.
These are ones that are made exactly the following morning. They're all identical.
When you say they're identical, what do you mean?
Depth, size.
Approximately 1.5 inches, about 10 to 12 inches across.
Okay.
The reason I was never suspicious that there was more than one landing site is because the landing marks and the pod casts that we did were identical.
And what happened to the strongest evidence in the case? Colonel Halt's audio tape.
There's no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead.
Within days of the sighting, Halt gave it to Wing Commander Colonel Williams. General Williams' comment on this, his words, that tape was an abomination. It had all kinds of things on it when I heard it the first time. And I had a hard time making any sense out of it and didn't know what to make of it, really. I didn't make too much of it at the time.
Well, he made enough of it that he took it and played it to his boss, the two-star general, commander of UF Air Forces in England.
I told my bosses about it. We didn't see any security threat or anything like this associated with it. So it, in time, sort of faded away.
Halt was ordered to turn the matter over to the British Ministry of Defense. He did so after writing a memo detailing the UFO incidents. The response to his report was silence. On the surface, it appeared the military had no interest in the case, but according to several witnesses, the Commander-in-Chief of all U.S. Air Force bases in Europe, General Charles Gabriel, came to Bentwaters Woodbridge to personally collect evidence.
It was said an aircraft had arrived from Wiesbaden, which at the time was the headquarters of the United States Air Force in Europe. Photographs were taken, documents were seized, logs were seized, and the aircraft returned to Wiesbaden. Some high brass had collected every scrap of evidence they could and took it away with them.
But exactly what evidence did General Gabriel take with him?
There was a motion picture camera filming this phenomena.
Somebody from the base was filming this. And no one knows what happened to these films. They just disappeared.
In 1994, a videotape allegedly smuggled out of Nellis Air Force Base clearly showed a UFO. The craft performed maneuvers remarkably similar to those described by Charles Halt and Jim Peniston back in 1980. If this tape is genuine, is it possible that the U.S. military has a secret library of these encounters, perhaps even footage of the Rendlesham Forest incident itself? The answer to those questions remains a mystery.
I don't know.
Back in Rendlesham Forest, scientist Patrick Davison is doing his best to answer some of those questions. Thus far, he hasn't uncovered any traces of residual radiation. This might be cause for disappointment, were it not for the fact that this scientific search led Peniston and Halt to the discovery of not one, but 2 landing sites.
I was taken there and told this is the landing site.
Mm-hmm. Your original memo. I mean, I seen that, and I was sure you were talking about the same site.
This is not the site that I went to where I saw something. So obviously, on the different nights, either 2 different things or the same thing came back.
Well, when I looked at the plaster cast was the same size as the indentations that I saw, and the distance between them was the same. So something landed twice. Mm-hmm. Whether it was the same thing or not, it was something similar.
Coming up, newly declassified documents shed light on the case.
The most convincing evidence is probably written by civil service personnel.
Did Men in Black investigate the Rendlesham case?
The Men in Black are for real.
And a conspiracy that leads straight to our nation's capital. Point blank, do you think the U.S. government is involved in the cover-up? UFO Invasion at Rendlesham will continue in a moment. Roswell, New Mexico, July 1947. A press release stating that the Army had recovered a down-flying saucer was suddenly contradicted by General Roger B. Ramey. Witnesses claim that even as photos were released showing that what crashed was only a weather balloon, teams of U.S. servicemen scoured the desert, removing every shred of evidence.
They basically grabbed anybody who was free to come out here to actually get down on their hands and knees to pick up the pieces of debris.
Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, December 1965. Another alleged UFO crash. And once again, scores of eyewitnesses reported that a large contingent of military personnel cordoned off the area and hauled away wreckage.
There was a large truck pulled up there. There was 4 people got out in moon suits, we called them at the time, white suits. They had a big box on like a litter, and the 4 of them carried that down into this object.
Suffolk, England, 1980, when some U.S. Air Force personnel said they spotted UFOs outside the Bentwaters Woodbridge air bases, the incident technically fell under the jurisdiction of Britain's Ministry of Defense. Like the U.S. military, the MOD has never publicly acknowledged the existence of any extraterrestrial craft. But the credibility of the MOD policies is now being tested by a public outcry and the dogged determination of one of Great Britain's highest-ranking military officers.
There are only 2 conceivable explanations for what we might call the Bentwaters incident. The first is that it happened. Something landed. Patrol was sent out to investigate it. They saw it, they photographed it, one of them even touched it. The other explanation is that nothing of the sort happened, and that Colonel Holt and a couple of his men were hallucinating. I would have thought it impossible for anybody to deny that either of those explanations is not of extreme defense interest.
Yet that's exactly what the Ministry of Defense said in 1980. And has continued to say since the Rendlesham case became public. Their stony insistence that nothing of significance occurred reflects years of downplaying and denials. As far back as 1952, Prime Minister Winston Churchill demanded a report from the MOD about flying saucers. The MOD responded that there was nothing to know.
And they will go on saying that, even if a UFO walked up the steps of the Defense Ministry and knocked on the Secretary of State's door.
Despite repeated statements of no defense significance, the MOD does investigate serious UFO claims. Nick Pope is one of the few government officials in the world to speak out candidly on the UFO phenomenon. Pope ran the MOD's UFO desk for many years.
Working for the Ministry of Defense, you do not come in with a mindset that says, you know, I think this was the flying saucer. However, the most convincing evidence for this case is probably written by military and civil service personnel at the heart of the British government.
Under strict British secrecy laws, the Rendlesham Forest incident would have remained locked in the MOD's files, had it not been that one crucial document was sent to an American intelligence agency. In 1983, UFO researchers filed a Freedom of Information Act request using information supplied by former airman Larry Warren.
It just snowballed because in June of '83, after numerous denials, outright lies by the United States Air Force, out came the Holt memo based on the information I supplied.
A friend of mine was the acting 3rd Air Force commander at the time, and he called me up and says, I've got this document and I've got this request. What do you think? And my comment to him was, burn it. He laughed and said, why? I said, if you release that, your life, the Air Force, and my life won't be the same. Trust me.
This was quite literally front page news. All the national newspapers ran it. What on earth happened in that forest? Why hadn't we heard about it before? Was there a cover-up? Was there a flying saucer?
As Colonel Holt had predicted, the headlines brought ridicule and skepticism to the few witnesses who'd gone public.
I'm sure you remember we met back, oh goodness, a long time ago. It was a long 9 or 10 years ago.
Now, as part of its investigation, the Sci-Fi Channel has brought Colonel Holt and Sergeant Peniston face-to-face with one of the Rendlesham Forest incident's strongest skeptics. Vince Thurkettle was the forester in charge of the Rendlesham area in 1980. He believed there were earthly explanations for the events.
Okay, based on the evidence that you've seen, okay, I take it that It's not enough.
Well,
right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, that's fine.
It has to be. It has to be, because I don't doubt you, gentlemen. On the tape, you know, all those years ago, everything I hear, I can picture. It sounds genuine.
There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
But some things are unhelpful to the case. It would have been very, very helpful if there wasn't a lighthouse.
Orford Ness Lighthouse sits 7.5 miles east of Rendlesham Forest and was functioning perfectly in December of 1980. It was Thurkettle who initially proposed what has come to be known as the lighthouse theory.
The beam of a lighthouse does come into the trees at about 4 feet, and it pulses at roughly the speed that the tape has.
Right in this position here, straight ahead, in between the tree. There it is again. Watch, straight ahead off my flashlight there. There it is. Hey, I see it too. What is it? We don't know, sir.
But could trained military investigators at a U.S. air base mistake a lighthouse for a UFO?
I take that, actually, I'm insulted when someone says something like a lighthouse. Here we are.
Well,
you know, we worked out here for months. We know where the lighthouse is at. I mean, that is just so ridiculous to bring that up.
It isn't an insult.
It's ridiculous. So
no.
it's below our intelligence level.
The whole time this was going on, we could see the lighthouse. The lighthouse was about 30, 35 degrees off where this object was seen. The lighthouse doesn't explode. The lighthouse doesn't move horizontally or through the trees.
It's not the lighthouse. I mean, I've been to that area. It doesn't explain the radiation readings. It doesn't explain the radar. It doesn't explain the indentations in the ground.
For Thurkettle, even the strange indentations can be readily explained.
When I saw the site, there were some marks on the ground, but they looked to me like the sort of marks a rabbit leaves. Rabbits scrape looking for roots and stuff, then pine needles fall back in, like the ones we're stood on now, and you end up with shallow depressions.
Well, they must be very smart rabbits, is all I can say. Very mathematical in nature, and I have never found a rabbit that smart. I was surprised when we did take the measurements, because they were 12 foot from center to center, exactly. That's not normally found in nature. It was something obviously man-made.
I've heard the idea that these are rabbit scratchings. I suspect that that was almost said as a joke to start off with. I have this wonderful image of radioactive rabbits hopping around the forest, glowing in the dark. No, these were not rabbit marks. Apart from anything else, I've seen the photos of the landing site. It's not rabbits.
For you guys to go in the woods and mistake some signs in the trees, that's understandable. It's not your subject.
About that.
I don't mean to be in the slightest disrespectful, because these are good airmen, I don't doubt. I don't doubt their sincerity, but I do doubt their fieldcraft.
All I know is I was out there that first night. I know I completed one of the best investigations of my entire military career. This thing wasn't lights in the sky. This was an object, a craft that had landed. I examined it. I walked around it. I felt it. This is an actual event. It happened. It doesn't matter what they say. I was there. They weren't.
UFO investigators believe clues to what really happened in Rendlesham Forest could be found in the documents held by the Ministry of Defense. In 2002, after innumerable requests and the public outcry of Lord Peter Hill Norton, the MOD suddenly released more than 100 documents.
The MOD have misled us all by saying that there was nothing that ever happened. And here we discover that the Defense Intelligence staff wanted to pursue an investigation to do with the radiation readings. We also know from the documents that the British Defense Intelligence staff were involved in an investigation. They were interested in the radar readings. We also find out the Chief of the US Air Force in Europe, General Gabriel, arrived at the base and was given the taped evidence. I think that the rest of the truth is in the Pentagon, in America, not here. I think that's where the missing links are.
If the Ministry of Defense has 180, 200 pages of papers on this. What does the United States hold?
Do you think the government knows what happened?
Absolutely.
There's no doubt in my mind.
Why would they choose not to say that they do?
That's a real good question. There's an awful lot of things that are known in our government and from foreign technology and perhaps from Lord knows where that aren't public knowledge and probably won't be. They're very highly compartmentalized.
When UFO invasion at Rendlesham continues, new evidence confounds the skeptics.
This site is just a whole new ballgame.
Was the base's nuclear stockpile a target for the UFOs?
Evidently, this object had shined a beam on the weapons.
And never-before-seen footage reveals shocking details of the interrogations.
Where did they give you the shot?
UFO Invasion at Rendlesham will return. Roswell, Kecksburg, Rendlesham. The list of UFO incidents is seemingly endless. So who does know the truth about these mysterious crafts and where they come from? The answer to those questions may shock you.
Has any president ever really known what's been going on? I'd say the fair money is that Harry S. Truman had a very good idea of it. Eisenhower, darling of the military establishment, probably knew a fair amount of it. Kennedy, I don't think they told him anything, although I think he knew.
According to my information, the most knowledgeable ex-president is former President George Bush. He was asked by one of his White House staffers how much he knew about the subject. Bush replied on the record, "You don't know the half of it."
The U.S. government remains silent on the issue, just as it has since 1947. The Rendlesham case serves as a dark reminder of just how far certain agencies will go to keep the entire subject of UFOs under wraps.
I think the saddest part of this story, and I think that some of the witnesses themselves will tell you, it wasn't so much what happened during the incident as what happened afterwards. Some of them were interrogated. Adrian Bustinza, for instance, you know, he was a sergeant, and he was interrogated for hours. He was told that what he had seen was the beam from the nearby lighthouse, and he kept saying, "No, no, no." He was told, "Bullets are cheap, a dime a dozen." And he said, once they said that, he said, yes, it was the lighthouse beam.
OSI is an independent agency. They're a police force in civilian clothes, in a way, but they're investigators. The name says it, Office of Special Investigation. And so they do things that go beyond the realm of the normal police force.
The Office of Special Investigation, OSI, has an awful lot of tools at their disposal for making people talk. Perhaps some chemical methods, or perhaps some hypnosis or trickery.
If the OSI was indeed spearheading the Rendlesham investigation, just how did they go about covering it up?
I suspect that the issue was that low-key it, don't give it a lot of publicity, work behind the scenes, find out what you can, use some people for disinformation, let them tell such a bizarre story that there's no credibility.
Do we consider Larry Warren part of that group?
I certainly do. I am firmly convinced that he was meddled with. By that I mean sodium pentothal and hypnosis.
Oh, come on.
You can believe it or not.
Who would meddle with him and why?
I'd rather not comment.
Well, wait, no. You can't say that and then just leave us hanging.
I think if you ask him, he will tell you. He was taken by the OSI to an office, and he was given an injection, and he was worked on.
Larry and a number of the other men who had been witnesses with him were taken to a secured facility.
They said, "You have seen something that we have known of for longer than any of you in this room has been alive. Here is the need for the security around it." We were made to sign documents without reading them, minimizing the events. They also showed us a film, and the film was gun camera footage without narration of UFOs that if it was ever shown, the game would be over. No explanation of what it was, just a lot of mind games, and they said bullets are cheap, kind of joking at one time if we talked about it.
If you had had witnesses to a highly classified incident, one way to deal with them is to put them under, create a kind of, Disneyland on LSD, all unreal and all programmed. The thought being that when they come out of it, these memories will mix with the actual memories of the event itself, and if they ever try to go public, they'll sound like blithering idiots.
I was starting to have symptoms of post-traumatic stress, which I understand now, and nightmares, and it's not uncommon of the witnesses. I go through these trees in dreams sometimes, and the most surreal things, situations, even Charles Halt's in them, and we're pursuing something that we don't want to see. I live in these things nightly.
Like so many who witnessed the Rendlesham Forest events, Sergeant Jim Peniston was plagued by nightmares.
Part of the reason I was seeing a psychiatrist, on this part of this was to go ahead and get rid of these dreams. One of the ways that she suggested that we could get rid of this problem is to do this regression.
For the first time ever on television, Jim Peniston has given the Sci-Fi Channel exclusive permission to air portions of his hypnotic regression. Could this prove to be the Rendlesham Forest smoking gun?
I really can't believe personally that all this stuff can be true. But the fact of the matter is the regression just about eliminated the nightmares.
Where did they give you the shot?
Among the most disturbing revelations to arise was that an agent or agents injected Peniston with sodium pentothal, more commonly known as truth serum.
Prior to hypnosis, I was not aware of any type of drug-induced methods within the Air Force or anything like that.
9 years after Peniston's hypnotic regression, the retired Air Force officer still had questions. Working in conjunction with a Sci-Fi Channel investigation, he returned to Rendlesham Forest in 2003 with his former deputy base commander, Colonel Charles Halt. Their investigation turned up a dramatic discovery: the existence of a second landing site. Armed with this new revelation, Peniston and Halt take Forester Vince Thurkettle to the second site identified by Peniston. Prior to this, Thurkettle strongly believed the airmen had mistaken the Orfordness Lighthouse for a UFO.
You and I only had one site.
Yeah. As far as we were concerned,
well,
because
that's it. I'd only ever heard about one site.
I made an assumption. They took me out. I say the police took me out and says, this is it.
You know, this is new, this is different. I have no opinion on this. I wasn't here 20 years ago. No one talked about this 20 years ago. The other site is the site of folklore. That's the one that's famous. That's the one that everyone's been visiting.
You've just ruined some things.
This site is just a whole new ballgame. This site is so far, and with the intervening trees and rises and falls in the ground, you could never have seen the farmhouse or the lighthouse from this site.
So talk to me, what was the significance of there being two sites?
Well, my site, there was no way you could see the lighthouse anyway from there. It wasn't visible from the location we were at.
Not at all?
Not at all.
So that removes that as a possible explanation?
Yes, it does.
Completely.
With each new piece of evidence, the Rendlesham puzzle becomes a bit more complete. During the course of Jim Peniston's 1994 regression, he recalled being interrogated by two mysterious men. He would have to wait 8 long years to discover their identity.
They're agents too. Yes, 8, C8, something. I can't hear everything. Part of this hypnosis on the tape is that I was debriefed by DS8, which made no sense at the time to me. When the MOD files came out, they mentioned DS8. I didn't even know it was a real agency.
DS8 stands for Defense Secretariat 8. That was essentially the civilian division within the Air Force side of the Ministry of Defense that had the lead on UFO investigations.
Could these agents have been the infamous Men in Black?
The Men in Black are for real.
I'm convinced from my studies that the Air Force Office of Special Investigations sends out counterintelligence investigators to deal with UFO witnesses. And I know many of people who've had quite alarming experiences with them.
Perhaps one reason for the intense interrogations in the Rendlesham case was the stockpile of nuclear weapons stored on the base.
I think there does seem to be no doubt that over military installations, research installations, establishments connected with particularly atomic weapons, there do seem to be a disproportionate number of sightings.
For many UFO researchers, the best example of the UFO nuclear connection is found on the HALT tape. Recorded on December 28, 1980, the tape provides a detailed account of the UFO's interest in the base's weapons storage area.
Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal.
It moved toward us at very high speed, came almost directly overhead, hovered, and sent down a direct beam, something like laser beams. I was thinking at the time, is this a warning? Is this a signal? Is this an attempt to communicate? And just as suddenly as it came on, it clicked, it was gone.
Did they take any particular interest in the place where weapons would have been stored if weapons had been on the base?
At least one of the beams of light came down in an area that I would say would be a high interest.
400 hours, one object still hovering over Woodbridge Base at about 5 to 10 degrees off the horizon, still moving erratic and similar lights and beaming down this area.
The object to the south was actually sending some beams down near or into the weapons storage area. That caused me a great deal of concern. You know, what was it doing there? Was it searching for something? Was it trying to... Who knows what it was trying to do?
General Gordon Williams, who was then the wing commander of Bentwaters Woodbridge, remembers hearing HALT's tape, but he doesn't recall any reports of a craft over the weapons storage area.
I don't recall him ever saying anything about that. And certainly I would have known and recognized the significance of that. We're not talking about now things being off base in the dark, talking about on base, a place that's lit up and that sort of thing. So it doesn't make sense to me that that would have occurred.
In the immediate aftermath of this, there was an unscheduled arrival of a large transport plane, either a C-130 or a C-141, that came in and had a special team that inspected the nuclear weapons of the base because evidently this object had shined a beam on the weapons, and it was speculated that they might have damaged the nuclear weaponry in some way. Now, lest that sound really incredible to someone, they might want to recall that nuclear weapons in America at Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1967 were tampered with by a UFO that disabled more than 10 nuclear missiles.
When UFO invasion at Rendlesham continues, does Peniston's regression reveal the ultimate answer?
Did you at any time have a sense that this craft came from another planet?
The preponderance of evidence in the Rendlesham case is undeniable. Official documents, an audio tape,
Probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you.
radar reports, and radiation readings.
These radiation readings were higher than normal, actually by a factor of about 10.
Even corroborating eyewitness testimony of numerous U.S. airmen and British civilians. There is also a belief, shared by many involved, that the U.S. and British governments tampered with evidence, threatened witnesses, and employed mind control techniques, all in an effort to conceal the entire affair.
Let's just say that I am familiar enough with workings of some government agencies that I did not trust them as far as I can throw this building.
Moving beyond the claims of brainwashing, cover-ups, and conspiracies, the biggest question involving the Rendlesham Forest incident remains unanswered. Exactly what was it that U.S. airmen encountered in December of 1980? The answer may well lie in secret government files, but perhaps it's contained in the repressed memories of eyewitnesses like Sergeant Jim Peniston.
Did you at any time have a sense that this craft came from another planet?
No.
For instance, did it come from Mars?
No.
So it originated.
Us.
It's us.
I don't believe in extraterrestrials. I never have. Probably never will. The only explanation that I can come up with, or a guess of it, this is nothing more than us experiencing some type of time travel or something like that. It sounds pretty bizarre. What else could it be?
If they are time travelers from our future, as some have suggested, that's encouraging news for our planet.
Whether these UFOs are indeed visitors from our future or from another planet, why does the government remain silent on the issue?
There is a very strong body of opinion which believes that the United States in particular is in communication with the occupants of these so-called flying objects. That a good deal of exchange of technology has taken place, that the United States has made significant advances in various technologies thanks to information given to them by the aliens.
Here you have technology that is so much more powerful than ours. If we could learn how to have the same technology, isn't that a wonderful power in this world? Isn't that what maybe some of the stealth is about?
Some of that technology is in use today, perhaps to do with advanced forms of weaponry and propulsion. In my view, it's absolutely justified that this information should continue to being withheld at an above top secret level.
Though the government continues its vehement denials, those who've witnessed these events refuse to keep quiet about the UFO question.
Don't you think we have a responsibility to tell what we saw? Don't you think so? Believe it or not, let you believe or let somebody else believe or not believe. You draw your own conclusions.
Brian, that investigation's not over. It never stopped. He retired in 91, I'm 93. But I'll tell you what, these citizens in the United States are getting a bang for their buck here. Because we're still trying to figure out what the hell we seen out there.
Like Roswell and Kecksburg, the Rendlesham Forest case remains a mystery, but hopefully not for long. The Sci-Fi Channel will continue its investigation of these cases and encourages anyone with new evidence or eyewitness testimony to contact the Sci-Fi Channel at sci-fi.com. I'm Bryant Gumbel. Thanks for watching.
Next on Sci-Fi, ECW.
The inevitable is here. They have 23 hours to save the planet from certain destruction.
If we don't break it up or stop it, millions of people will die.
Welcome to your worst nightmare. Asteroid premieres
experience that tells the story of young Adama in the first Cylon War.
They were making something down here! Experimenting on people!
The best 2 minutes on television. Razor flashbacks every Friday during Flash Gordon at 9. It's all leading up to Battlestar Galactica Razor, premiering Saturday, November 24th at 9 on Sci-Fi.